I was never allowed to go into the woods behind our house. My dad always told me that there were caves that I could fall into and nobody would ever find me. I felt like a giant hole in the ground would be pretty easy to see, but I never did go into the woods. I tried once when I was a little girl. I think I was like 8 or 9. My dumbass set off the motion lights before I even got to the tree line. Dad came running out, more mad than I had ever seen him. He took his belt off and beat me all the way back to my room. I was too scared of him to try going back into the woods ever again. I'm 16 now. I mean, if I'm ever going to see what's out there, I might as well do it now. My mom is so scared to try new things. I don't want to get old like her and be too afraid to go out there. I decided I was going to go out there. After everyone was asleep, I snuck out. Last week, Dad was complaining about the light bulb for the motion light going out. I don't think he has fixed it yet. I will test it out before I run out in the middle of the backyard. I wouldn't be out long, just be like an hour or so. I only grabbed a flashlight, a compass, and my phone. If there were caves out there, I wanted to go inside and film them. They are probably small sinkholes, but maybe I can see something cool. If I did fall into a hole, I would have my phone. I could just call someone to get me. I waited until midnight to go out, make sure everyone was asleep. I was able to sneak out of the garage without making a sound. There is a window in the garage that doesn't have a screen. James hit a baseball through the window a few years ago, and they never finished fixing the window. They got as far as replacing the glass, and that was it. I thought to leave the window open in case I needed to get back in fast. My room is close to the garage, so I should be able to get back in before anybody notices that my room was empty. Earlier that day, I put a basketball on the side of the garage by the window. Once I went around the corner to the back of the house, the motion sensor could see me. I grabbed the ball and rolled it into the backyard. If the light was working, then the ball would trip it, and I would have time to crawl back through the window and be back in bed before anybody had a chance to get out of theirs. Nothing. It remained dark. I was good. So I took off towards the woods. I waited until I was far enough into the woods that I couldn't see the lights from my house before I turned on my flashlight. Everything around me was silent except the sound of crickets. I checked my compass. I needed to keep going east. The back of our house faced east, so I thought I would go in a straight line so it would be easy to turn around and come straight back out. Ever since I was a little girl, I have wanted to explore these woods. I wanted to build a fort back here and huge tree houses. I wanted several tree houses that I could swing between with a rope. I asked my dad all the time to build it for me, but he always lectured me about not going into the woods. It was so unfair. I could have had the coolest childhood ever, but I didn't get it because my dad was afraid I would fall into a hole. He is way too overprotective. I wasn't seeing anything out here except trees and rocks. The hills out here felt like mountains as I went up and down them. Even though I had a flashlight, I kept snagging my arms and legs on thorns. I kept thinking, how am I going to hide this in the morning when I have cuts all over me? My parents will know I have been in the woods. I'm going to have to go to school looking like the emo girl with scars all over her arm. What is everyone going to think of me? Screw it. Who cares? I will wear long sleeves for a week or so until they go away. I want to know what's in these woods. I'm not stopping now just because of a few scratches. I had been walking for about 20 minutes when I came to something cool. It was a wad of hair. It looked black and brown. Mostly black, but it was long, 3 or 4 inches long. It had been caught on a broken branch that was sticking out. It was almost as high as my shoulders, so whatever brushed against it was big, like really big. The only thing I could think of was a bear or an elk. Our neighbors saw a black bear in their yard a few years ago, but those things really aren't that big, like they would probably come up to my waist. And they don't have long hair like this. It had to be an elk. There aren't too many around here, I thought, but I think I heard one of my hunting friends from school talking about the conservation trying to populate the area with them. I stuck the glob of hair in my pocket. Maybe my friend could tell me where it was from. I walked for like 10 or 15 minutes, and I saw something weird hanging in a tree. It was metal, hanging from a branch, swaying with the limbs. As I got closer, I could see that it was a large bird cage. It was almost as tall as I was, but the bottom of it was hanging just a little higher than my head. It was black from how long it had been outside, but it still looked shiny when my light was on it. The cage was completely empty. I studied it, trying to figure out why there was a bird cage out here in the middle of nowhere. I grabbed onto it and tried to swing it. It moved, but the metal was so heavy it was hard to push. What type of bird would need such a heavy-duty cage? As I was inspecting it, I noticed the bottom of the cage had a really dark brown sticky layer on it. It wasn't dried sap from the tree, and I don't think it was bird poop or anything. After picking at it for a while with my fingernail, I realized that it was dried blood. I scanned the woods around me to see if there was anything, just trees as far as my light could reach, then black. Why would anybody leave birds in a cage like this to die? I'm not sure how far back my parents' land goes, but it should be far. I'm probably still on our land. Actually, I'm sure of it. We own about 800 acres. I wonder if my parents know that there is a huge bird cage out here? Maybe I should tell them about it. Well, no. Then they would know I was out here. I'm just going to keep going and see if I find anything else. Deeper into the woods I went. I wasn't as focused as I was on what was right in front of me. I scanned everything around me as I slowly walked farther. I didn't want to miss something else. It would be so easy to walk straight past something that was a couple of feet to my side. As I walked, I couldn't stop thinking about that cage. I turned around to look at it and noticed something else. It wasn't the only one. I had been so focused on going in a straight line that I hadn't noticed that there were a few other cages scattered around hanging from limbs. That doesn't make sense. I looked all around me when I was at the cage and I didn't see these. I went back to the first cage I saw and looked around again. I couldn't see the others. They were hidden behind trees. I went to each cage. I couldn't see the other cages when I went to each of them. Was this on purpose? Maybe whatever birds they were keeping in here were like betta fish and would get pissed off if they saw each other. All of the cages had blood in them. Some had more than others, but I definitely saw blood on all of them. It's kinda weird, but I didn't notice any bones. If they let these birds die in the cages, I figured there would be some bones in or under the cage, but the area was completely clear. Probably some coyotes or something drug off the remains. The bones should be somewhere. It doesn't really matter. I want to see what else is in these woods. Onward, eastward, I went. I felt a lot more excitement now. Before I saw the cages, I felt kinda nervous about falling into a hole, but now that I found something kinda cool, I was ready to explore a lot more. I hadn't gone very far when I found a trail. It wasn't fancy or anything, barely more than a deer trail, but it was definitely something that was taken a lot. I was able to move a lot more freely. Whatever has been using it cleared all the thorns. I don't know if it was some animal eating the brush or maybe somebody has been out here clearing it out. Either way, I was happy not to have 1,000 thorns in my legs. I was able to move quickly now that I was on the path. I went a long way over the next few minutes. I noticed something up ahead on the trail that looked freaky. It was a ring on the trail, but like huge. It looked like an archway, but a complete circle. It was still a ways away, but I was getting closer. When I got to it, I could see that it was a circle made of trees. The trees were braided into a ring that was large enough for someone to walk under without having to duck through. This is way cooler than a cave. Who made this? How did they do it? It looks like the trees would have broken if they did this. They must have been braiding them as they grew. Who has time for that? And why? Once I stepped through the circle, I couldn't believe what I saw. It was like a church. Pews were made out of logs. They were all set up facing a large pile of ashes. What was this? Did my parents know that a group of people were having church out here on our land? That large of a fire could get out of hand easily. They could have burned down all of our land. It could have gotten to our house. These selfish pricks could have ruined our lives with their creepy little book club. That's all I need for tonight. I found more than I thought I would. I wanted to get back to talk to my parents. I know I will get in trouble, but I need to tell them about these people who are coming out here. I took some pictures of the outdoor chapel and headed back down the trail. I looked at my compass and noticed that I hadn't been going east. I had been going northeast. I should have paid attention to that and marked where I got on the trail. I had no clue where I should have gotten off the trail. I would have to guess. Nothing looked familiar as I went back. Just a bunch of dark trees and brush. Why didn't I think about going back? If I head west, I might not hit our house perfectly, but I should at least get to the road that our house is on, then I can go down the road to our house. I walked a couple of minutes and left the trail going west. I knew I wasn't on the same path that I had taken in because I never saw cages. This made me slightly nervous because I knew that people come out here and they had cages and were making weird things with the trees. What if those cages weren't for birds? I needed to get back home as fast as possible. I started running. I couldn't go too fast because I was still trying to see where I was going. Tripping on a rock, breaking my leg, could be a death sentence, being this far into the woods without anybody knowing where I was. I was wrong about calling my parents. I could, but they wouldn't know where I was. Suddenly, the ground gave out, and I was falling. Shit. No! I landed at the bottom of the hole. I wasn't hurt. I fell onto a bunch of branches that must have fallen into the hole. As I lay on the ground, I tried to collect myself. This must be one of the caves. I didn't see it at all. I pointed my flashlight up and saw I fell through the brush. It was a trap. There were limbs put over the hole. I looked around the hole. I couldn't see much. I looked down at the branches that I had fallen on. They weren't branches. They were bones. I jumped up and tried to find a spot without bones. The floor was completely covered in them. I screamed out for help, but there was no way anybody could hear me. I silenced myself quickly, though. There was nobody around to hear me. If there were, it would be the people who made the trap. I pulled myself for a second. I scanned over the bones. None of them were human. They were smaller animals. It looked like dog bones, probably coyotes or foxes. There were a few larger skeletons as well. Maybe those were deer. At least it wasn't a trap for people. How the hell do I get out of this hole? I looked around to see if there was a way out. The hole was about 10 feet deep and 10 feet across. I tried to climb out, but getting a grip was impossible on the smooth rock. I couldn't find any dirt that I could dig out to make a way out. Something stopped me from finding a way out. Something was moving outside the hole. I was frozen as I listened. Something was walking around the hole. I turned off my flashlight and waited for it to pass. A sound pierced through me. It was like nothing I had ever heard, but I knew it came from whatever was walking around up there. I turned on my flashlight and pointed it where the sound came from. Large red eyes looked down at me. I could only see its head, but I knew it was the largest animal I had ever seen out here. It had long, black, shaggy hair and horns that curled back. I couldn't move. My mind was blank. Its gaze stole every bit of survival instinct out of me. I just waited for it to end me. With one swift movement, it jumped down into the hole and grabbed me with its mouth. With a powerful leap, I was flying through the air in its mouth. Its jaws were clamped around my waist. Once we landed on the ground, it put me down on the grass. It stepped back and studied me. Should I play dead? Fight it? Or run? My mind went into hyperspeed, and I jumped up and ran as fast as I could. I didn't look behind me. I just ran as fast as I could. At first, I didn't hear anything behind me, just the brush and limbs as I ran through them. I ran for a few minutes before I dared look behind me. I saw it. Like a werewolf jumping through the shadows, completely silent. I couldn't help myself. I had no control over my voice. I just started screaming. I saw light. It was our house. I screamed out for help. The sound behind me gets louder. I tried to look and see where it was, but it moved without being seen. I ran as fast as I could. I kept my eyes on the light as the glow got larger. I should be there soon. I kept screaming for help as I ran. I saw another light come on in the house. They heard me. I kept screaming for help. I turned around again and said it. It was jumping from tree to tree. It stayed invisible for the most part, but I could still see the shadow darting towards me. It was getting closer. I was close enough that I could see the outline of the house. The clearing from the yard was just ahead of me. Suddenly, the yard was lit up with the brightest light I had ever seen. It blinded me, but I kept running. As I reached the yard, I saw a silhouette running towards me. "Dad, help me!" He reached me and kept running past me. "Get in the house now!" He yelled at me as he passed. I did as he said. As I closed the door behind me, I turned to see my mom. She didn't say anything, but she had the saddest face I have ever seen. I went to the window and watched the backyard, waiting for my dad to come back out. I tried to calm my breathing so I could hear the creature, but I heard nothing. My mom was behind me, watching out the window too. "What was that thing? Did you know about it?" She didn't respond. She just stood motionless behind me, staring out into the dark woods. Oh, thank God. He emerges after a few minutes. He marched straight inside and to his room. As he passed by us, he only said one thing without looking at us. "We will never talk about this night."
The forest rose like a cage of blackened spears, yet even they could not restrain what stirred in the dark. The moon hung full and bright in the sky, casting an ethereal glow over the dense forest. Daniel stood at the edge of the woods, heart racing, every instinct screaming at him to flee. He had always felt different, but tonight, something primal stirred within him. The legends whispered in his ear, tales of the cursed and the powerful. He inhaled the earthy scent of the damp soil as he watched the pines dance against the gleam of the moon. It started as a tingling sensation, creeping through his limbs like static electricity. He had heard the stories of transformation, of pain, but nothing prepared him for the reality of it. He clenched his fists, nails digging into his palms as the first wave of agony hit him. "Breathe," he muttered. But it felt like the air had been stolen from his lungs. He doubled over, gasping, the world around him blurring. The moonlight shimmered, casting shadows between the trees that danced like demonic marionettes. Panic surged as he realized he was not alone. Something dark was awakening inside him. His bones began to ache, cracking and shifting, the sound echoing through the stillness of the night. Daniel screamed, a primitive, guttural cry that echoed through the trees, the forest trembling in response. He fell to the ground, hands clawing at the earth, as his body twisted and contorted. The pain was unbearable, a tempest raging within, tearing him apart. "Stop, please," he shouted. But the voice in his head was drowned out by the beast clawing its way to the surface. He could feel it, an ancient hunger, an insatiable desire for freedom and power. The struggle was maddening, a war between man and monster. Daniel felt his skin stretching, tearing, as dark fur sprouted, enveloping him in a suffocating embrace. In the midst of his agony, a strange warmth blossomed within him. Power surged through his veins, intoxicating and wild. Each muscle twitched and rippled as the transformation took hold, and the ache began to morph into something more, a thrill, an exhilaration. He was no longer just a man, he was something ancient and fierce. He howled again, but this time the sound was different. It was a call to the night, an invitation to the hunt. The forest responded, its creatures stirring in answer. The instinct to run, to chase, surged within him, and for the first time, Daniel felt liberated from the chains of his humanity. As the final pieces fell into place, he rose to his full height, towering and powerful. He gazed down at his claws, sharp and glistening in the moonlight, and felt an overwhelming sense of dominance. The fear that had gripped him moments before faded, replaced by a primal satisfaction that coursed through him like wildfire. But lurking beneath the surface was a gnawing dread, the realization of what he had become. In the shadows of his mind, the remnants of Daniel struggled against the growing darkness. "What have I done?" he thought. But it was drowned out by the beast's feral joy. The hunger became unbearable. He could feel the pulse of life around him, the thrum of prey, the intoxicating scent of blood. The transformation had awakened something insatiable. The forest was alive with possibilities, and Daniel could no longer distinguish between what was right and what was the call of the wild. He took his first step, muscles coiling like a spring, and bounded into the darkness, the thrill of the hunt igniting his senses. Each leap felt like flying, the world blurring around him, exhilarating and terrifying. As he vanished into the shadows, he could almost hear the whispers of his humanity, pleading for remembrance. But with every heartbeat, the beast grew stronger, promising him power, freedom, and a life unshackled by the mundane. The last vestiges of Daniel began to fade, consumed by the intoxicating allure of what he had become. Deep within the forest, the moon watched, casting its silver light on the predator born anew, a creature torn between the thrill of power and the echoes of a man left behind, a slave to the freedom he created.
It was the fall of 1953, or maybe it was 1954. I was a young boy about your age, 8 or 9. Father had me out back by the barn chopping wood. It was supposed to be a cold winter that year. He would say that you would know because the pigs would gather sticks. Don't know if it was true or not. Seemed like every winter was cold. Back then, you had to keep a fire going in the fireplace to keep the house warm. Not like today, where you just press a button and get the exact temperature that you want. It was hard work back then. You had to be very uncomfortable to be comfortable. Father always told me that wood keeps you warm 3 times: when you cut it, when you split it, and when you burn it. The sun was getting close to going down. Everything was a bright golden hue. The leaves had all changed color, and some were starting to fall deep in the woods behind the house. I heard this sound. Nothing like what I had ever heard before. Sorta sounded like a woman screaming, but different. Had this deep sound with it that ate to my soul. I stopped for a moment to listen, but didn't hear anything. Decided to get back to work before Father found me standing around and tanned my hide for being lazy. A few minutes later, I hear it again. I couldn't help wondering if maybe it was a woman. I felt pretty confident that I could handle anything that was bothering her. I was full of bronze and I had an axe, so I headed off into the woods to find her. I probably went a mile into the woods and didn't see a thing. I was about to turn around. It was going to be dark soon, and I didn't want a chance getting lost overnight in the cold woods. Suddenly, I heard something. Some limbs, not even 20 feet away from me. Then I heard it again. It was so loud, that sound. I can still hear it today. It shook me to my core. I looked over and it came out from some bushes. I thought it was a bear at first, bigger than a black bear, a grizzly, but it had black hair. It looked right at me. Its face looked like a lion's, but it had twisting horns like a goat's. It stepped towards me with confidence. It knew who was in charge. It didn't move like a bear. It moved like a wildcat. I ran. I just ran as fast as I could. I don't know if it chased me. I couldn't hear it. Not sure if you would be able to hear that thing running or not. I didn't look back to check. I didn't stop till I was back at the house. I locked the door behind me and went straight to Mother and Father. Nobody ever believed me, but I know what I saw. I know what I heard. That thing is real. It's out there. This is the story that I heard throughout my entire childhood. Every family get-together, every holiday, every bedtime story. That was my grandpa's favorite tale. I don't know if he was telling the truth or not. It could have been a dream or a story he heard from a friend. Or maybe he just made it up. It made me so scared as a kid to go into the woods. When I got older, I tried to see if anyone else had seen anything like it on the internet. Turns out that my grandpa wasn't the only one that has seen something like that a bunch of people had in the Arkansas and Missouri area. They call it the Ozark Howler. It is a mythical creature, kind of like Bigfoot. Most people do not believe in it at all, but the ones who do swear to their lives that it is real. My grandpa got the land and house after his father died. He lived there his whole life. Last year, he passed away. When I was a kid, my parents moved us up north to Omaha, Nebraska. Over the past year, I have been thinking a lot about those stories that he would tell me. He always had some sort of story, but they never seemed far-fetched or made up. He took me fishing a few times when I was a kid. Each time when we got home, he would tell my parents the adventures we had on the creek, and they were always right. He was never one who would be like. We caught 43 crappie and the smallest one was a foot long. What if he really did see that thing? My mom and her brother both inherited the land. Neither of them wanted to sell it, but it didn't make sense to keep it and pay all the taxes. They decided to lease out a part of it and have a cell tower placed on it. The money they made from that covered the taxes completely and left them with a couple of $100s left over each month. I still had a week of vacation left, and the year was coming to an end, so I thought I would go check out the old cabin. Maybe spend a couple of nights in a tent out in the woods. I have a girlfriend, but I thought it would be better to leave her at home for this trip. She didn't understand. Had quite a fight before I left about it. I will have to deal with that when I get home. But I wanted it to be like my grandpa's experience. Just me out in the woods. I didn't tell my mom I was going to go out to look for that thing. The one good thing that came from Grandpa's passing was that she wouldn't have to hear about that creature again. 43 years of hearing that story over and over can get old fast. So it was just me on the road. I rented a Jeep Renegade for the trip. It will be getting dark by the time I get there. I was hoping to get there earlier, but I was held up with traffic in Kansas City. I just zoned out with the radio for the next few hours until I got there. Not really thinking about what will happen if I actually see this thing, just focusing on enjoying the place where my grandfather grew up. Maybe it will help me understand him more. The sun was starting to set when I arrived. The golden light cut through the winter blue of the Ozarks like claws. I decided that I will stay in my grandfather's house tonight. Tomorrow I will set up the tent in the woods. I hadn't realized how long my grandpa had been away from the house. During his last few years, he had declined a lot. He had to spend the last bit of life he had trapped away in a nursing home like an animal. After his death, the family ravaged his place, fighting over little knickknacks that ended up being worthless and selling everything else that they didn't want that my grandfather had spent his whole life collecting. They left some stuff, the beds, couches, and personal things like documents, so that the family could come back and have a weekend getaway. Since then, not a soul has been in there. When they cleared out the house, they did not take the time to clean it. They just took what they wanted, then sent the rest to auction. The whole house had a musty smell. The roof looked old from the outside. It might have been damaged in a storm recently and made a leak for rain to get in. Maybe I could spend some of my time fixing up the place and getting it back to its prime. The first night, I slept like a baby. I wasn't too keen on sleeping in a bed or on the couch because I was scared that it might be full of bugs or worse. So I used my air mattress in the middle of the living room. If there was any howling that first night, I had no idea. The next morning, I woke up eager to look through my grandpa's stuff to learn more about him. He had turned the spare room into an office. There was an old desk in there that he would never let anyone touch. Maybe it was because he didn't want me as a kid messing anything up. Maybe it was because he had something in there he didn't want anyone to see. I started digging through it after I ate some leftover chips from the drive. I dug through a lot of receipts. Mostly from the hardware store. I guess he thought he might need to return a box of screws he got in 1974. There were letters from family members and friends. It looked like he kept every letter that he had ever gotten. There were a lot fewer letters from more recent years. I didn't know he actually kept letters. He always wrote handwritten letters to my mom and me. A couple of times a year I used to write back when I was a kid. Then, eventually, I would just call him when I got a letter. Then I would just read it and throw it away like a generic birthday card without cash inside. If I had known how much they meant, I would have taken more time to write more often. In the bottom drawer of the desk was a large folder. It's beige, and the corners are almost black from so much use. The edges burst with all different types of paper. Some were notebook papers, some were letters, and some were even napkins. It looked like there was once an attempt to organize them, but it had gotten out of hand with so much. I opened the cover, and the first thing I saw was an old handwritten letter from my grandpa. He had written his story of the Howler just like he always told. His sloppy cursive writing was almost too illegible to read, but I knew the story well enough that I could read it. The next page was another handwritten letter. It wasn't as old or as detailed, but it read, "Hello, Raymond. I have that story that you were asking me to write down. Not sure why you needed me to write it. I told you what happened the other day, but here we go. About a year ago, I was driving down County Road 413, and about a mile away from the old general store, I saw something in the road. It was large, and it looked like it was black, or a dark brown. When I got closer, it turned its head around and looked at me. Beady red eyes with horns. It looked like a puma, but those ain't around here. And I know I saw horns on that thing. When it saw me, it ran off into the woods. It had been in the middle of the road, eating a deer. That was the only time I'd seen something like that. The next page was a military document, or at least that's what it looked like. It had a circular stamp in the top left corner with an eagle. Most of the letter was marked out with black bars of ink, but I was still able to read some of it. After a local sheriff deputy called about a large, uncategorized animal. A large chunk was missing here, 4 lines of the document. Tribe took over and handled the situation. Returned from Hinto Caverns with the mission accomplished. How would my grandpa get a hold of a document like that? I didn't believe it. I felt bad for him. He spent his life chasing a fairy tale, and everyone knew it. Who knows how many of these letters were fake stories? Probably all of them. It's a small town. Everyone knew what he thought, and they made up these stories and gave them to him to get him going. I couldn't read any more of them. If this thing were actually real and that many people had an experience with it, then it would be a documented animal, not just an urban legend. I decided to go outside and split some wood to get my mind off those stories. I would need some wood to make a fire anyway. The air outside was brisk. It made it hard to hold onto the axe handle as my knuckles hurt and felt swollen from the cold. The first couple of swings jolted through my fingers. After those couple of swings, my body warmed up and I didn't notice my fingers hurting. Suddenly, I really understood what my great-grandpa would say about wood. Around noon, I felt like I had thumped the log enough. Most swings just bounced off the wood, but I did manage to get some split. I had made a very small pile with my work, but it should be enough to keep a campfire going through the night. I had underestimated how hard it was to split wood. The only thing that kept me going for so long was thinking about my grandpa doing it as a child, and I couldn't hardly do it as an adult. Made me realize I needed to put the phone down more often and do something hard for a change. I should have at least put on a pair of gloves. The palms of my hands were covered in blisters, and a couple had popped, leaving bloody prints on the axe handle. I had packed enough canned vegetables and meat to last a month. I wasn't sure how much I would eat of just canned chicken or a can of green beans, so I went a bit overboard. While I was eating some tuna mixed with corn, I wouldn't recommend it, by the way, I texted my girlfriend. I hadn't texted her since I left, and I hadn't heard anything from her, so I knew that she was mad that I went on this trip by myself. That being said, I thought it would be better to text than call and run down my phone battery listening to her bitch for an hour. After a few texts of, "I miss yous" and blah blah blah, she seemed happy and I went on with my day. My hands didn't feel like it, but I needed to put up the tent before it got dark. I also need to make a fire before the sun's warmth wears off. My dad used to take me camping some when I was a kid. It wasn't very primal. We would stay at a KOA, so we had running water and access to electricity, but at least I learned how to put up a tent. The one I brought was the same tent my dad and I used to use. It wasn't fancy, but it would keep any rain out and keep the wind off of me. Making a fire was the easiest part of the day. I brought lighter fluid. I was going to try to keep the fire going throughout the week so I wouldn't have to keep making new fires. As it became evening, I sat in the tent and enjoyed the surroundings. I set up camp on the edge of the woods. I wanted to be close enough to the house that I could go inside if it got too cold. But I also wanted to be out enough that I could hear any noises. The leaves had all fallen, but they still rustled on the ground in the wind. The naked branches swayed in the cold as it became darker. I noticed some squirrels gathering nuts and crows circling something dead in the woods. Besides those noises, it is silent. Hours go by as I just listen, not doing a thing. I didn't even think about my phone, or my grandpa, or this creature I came to see. Nothing really mattered at that time. A sound cracked through the silence. I wasn't sure what it was. It sounded kind of like an elk call I had seen on the Discovery Channel when I was a kid, but it was different. There aren't elk around here, not that I have ever heard of. That couldn't be it. I listened intently to hear it again. Once again, it rang out, but this time it was different. It was the same sound like an elk, but it was quick, little bursts of sound, like it was a pulsing sound. It sounded like no animal I had ever heard, and it came from deep in the woods. Without hesitation, I ran into the woods to get closer and see what made that sound. Could it be the howler? After about 100 feet into the woods, I stopped as I realized that I could hear nothing besides my feet stopping on the leaves. Whether it was the howler or some other animal, nothing was going to stick around if it heard me barging through the woods like that. I slowed to a walk. I tried to avoid any leaves or sticks on the ground. How far could that sound travel? Was it a mile away or just ahead? I couldn't stop trying to replay that sound in my head as I walked to determine how far away it was. It had to be far, right? The noise came again. A long, high-pitched yell. It almost sounded like a girl's scream, but there was something to it that sounded deeper, like you knew whatever it came from was large. It came from my right. Either it was moving or I had lost track of my direction. It was much louder too. This time I must be getting closer. By this time, the light of day was disappearing, and it was getting a lot harder to tell what was in front of me, let alone which direction I was going. I could use my phone's flashlight, but I didn't want to scare it off with the light. Plus, that would drain my battery, and I might have to use the compass later to get back. So I kept going as straight as I could. Stepping over fallen limbs and going around trees made it hard to know if I was going in a straight line, but I thought that I might be. Suddenly, something stopped me in my tracks. Sharp pain pierced my body in different places, and I was being held in place. I panicked for a second before I realized what had happened. I walked right into a barbed wire fence. I felt a warm liquid running down my arm. I pulled out my phone and used the flashlight for just a moment to see how bad the cut was. It wasn't deep, but it went from my elbow all the way up to my shoulder. I wiped the blood off and continued on. I pulled the middle wires apart so I could go through. A couple more snags on my back and legs, and I was through. After a few steps, the stinging itch came from the cut. I could feel blood starting to drip down my arm again. Maybe it was a little deeper than I was thinking. I wiped it away again, but blood sprang from it again. I needed to get back to the house and take care of this. I can always come back out here tomorrow night. The next morning, I slept in. I woke to the intense beams of light from the sun, blinding my eyes. 10 o'clock. I haven't slept in that late since I was in high school. I thought I would spend the day trying to figure out where the leak was in the roof. I'm not a carpenter or anything, but I could probably smear some tar on a hole. I found a can of tar in the garage. Now I will just have to get into the attic and find the leak. I was hoping for a nice dusty movie attic with a floor and a light, but it wasn't like that at all. The floor was all rafters that I had to balance on, so I didn't fall through the ceiling. With each step, I kicked up swarms of glass-filled dust from the old insulation. It must have been the first batch of insulation ever made. It was hard, and most of it had turned black from the humidity that the attic pulled in through the vents. A little fiberglass never hurt anybody. As my eyes drew from the insulation up to the roof, I noticed the leak. It was a bit worse than I thought. A lot worse. The plywood over the spare room was so rotten that I could stick my fingers right through it. That wasn't going to stop any water that came to it. How the hell are you supposed to fix that? I would need to take the shingles off and replace the plywood, then put the shingles back on. At least that's what I learned from watching an hour of YouTube in the attic. I could probably get a sheet of plywood in the Jeep. The old shingles are most likely shot, so I would need to get some of those too. I was about 20 minutes into my YouTube lessons on how to replace shingles when I heard the doorbell. The sound paralyzed me, not knowing if I should answer it or stay where I was. Not making a sound, I realized that my Jeep was out front. Someone must be thinking that a squatter found the abandoned house and took refuge. I thought I should go down and answer before they call the police. When I answered the door, a very tall man stood on the other side. He must have been 6'6" or something. He had long, straight black hair with nearly black eyes. His skin was dark complexioned. He definitely had some white in his family somewhere, but he was mostly Native American. My grandpa had told me there was a tribe of natives living in this tiny town. "Hey, can I help you?" "What are you doing here?" he responded. "This was my grandpa's house. I'm just down for the week." "Walt's or Olivia's son?" "Olivia is my mom. Is that all you want?" I tried to end the conversation so I could get back to the roof. Your grandfather, he was a good man. Thanks, I liked him too. Lots of stories, though. Yeah, that's why I'm down here. He always talked about a creature. Don't believe in it, but I wanted to come down and see for myself. I might be able to get a hint where to look for the creature if this guy knows anything. Yes, that was his favorite. Just a story, though. I wouldn't waste my time chasing a fairy tale. I heard something last night. Some sort of howling that I haven't heard before. I tried to find it, but it was too far away. I pointed in the direction that I went, searching to prod a little information. That way? That is my land over there. Lots of things come out at night that you don't hear in Omaha. His eyes lost the slight bit of friendliness they had. Dogs, coyotes, sometimes we get an occasional wolf. Who knows what you heard? I didn't know that was your land. I turned around when I got to the fence. It got me pretty good. I told him as I showed my arm. About 800 acres. Been in the family for a long time. You haven't heard anything about this thing? The woods are large. I wouldn't go in there by yourself at night. Good way for a city slicker to get lost and never found again. He had become completely cold towards me as he turned and went back to his car. I hadn't noticed his car before, but he was driving a Jeep too. An old 90s Wrangler without a top. Most of those Jeep guys have ducks on their dash, but this guy didn't. He had a bunch of blue crystals. The sun caught them, glaring into my eyes, catching my attention. While I was out of the attic, I might as well eat some lunch and look up how to fix this roof. A couple of cans of green beans later, I decided that I needed something a little more satisfying for my next meal. I'm sure there is a small grocery store somewhere in this small town. I could get some hot dogs and eat them tonight over the campfire. I found a common dollar a few miles away. I was going to ask the cashier about the creature, but she was so high that it was all she could do to put the pack of hot dogs in the grocery bag. She fought with the bag, trying to get it to open for at least a minute. After I got back to the house, I thought it might be better to move camp to the fence in the woods instead of working on the house more. I didn't want to run into the fence again when I couldn't see. Plus, I now know that once I pass the fence, I will have 800 acres before I have to worry about another fence. Whatever I heard the night before had to be in part of the woods. Camp went up fast this time. I had the tent up and the fire going in less than an hour. I ended up eating the entire pack of hot dogs by the time the sun went down. I didn't realize just how hungry I was. The crackling of the fire seemed extremely loud when I was trying to listen to what was going on outside of the fire's light. With a few scoops of dirt, I had the fire out, now to wait in the darkness. I was completely still for hours, waiting and listening for a sound. At 11:30, I heard it. That same sound from the night before. I jumped to attention, trying to determine which direction it came from. The sound came again, and I was on my way, tracking through the woods. I kept walking for about 30 minutes. I checked my phone. It was 11:55. I wasn't going very fast, so I wouldn't make noise. By this point, it had moved on, or I went in the wrong direction. I was nearing the top of a hill. I could tell by the slight line of darkness that divided the ground from the sky. The sky was slightly lighter than the ground. I thought I would make it to the top of the hill and see what was over it. If there was nothing, then I was going to turn back around. As I walked over the top, I looked around. It was hard to see through all the trees, but at the bottom of the hill, maybe 300 yards, was a small flickering light. Finally, I had a guiding light to help me know my direction. I crept closer and closer, bouncing from tree to tree for cover. I wasn't sure what the light was coming from, but I knew it wasn't any kind of light bulb. As I got within 100 yards, I could tell that it was a fire. A bonfire. A very large bonfire. I could see people around it, but it was hard to tell with the bright light of the fire melting away into the darkness. I was straining my eyes to see who was around the fire when I heard a twig snap right behind me. I turned around to see two large people standing over me. It was hard to make them out, but they wore robes that drug on the ground. Over the robe, I could see gauntlets shimmering from the firelight. They both had armor on their heads, too. a smooth helmet that didn't have holes for a mouth or eyes. The smooth metal went all the way from the top of their heads and led to a point that stopped at the top of their sternum. They looked like warrior angels as they stood over me. One drew out a large club that was hand-carved with letters and symbols all over it. Then, whack, everything went black. I woke in a haze. Everything was blurry, my skin burned, my head throbbed, and my whole body stung like I'd been stung by 1,000 wasps. The light was blinding. It was so bright and hot. It took a few moments for my mind to clear and my vision to see what was going on. I was on the ground on my knees. I was only in my underwear. My arms were stretched out, each wrist tied off with rope. Each rope was tied off to a pole. Each side of me was one of those guys that I had seen, holding the poles, stretching my arms apart, nearly pulling my chest apart. The heat and light came from the bonfire that I had seen. It was a couple of feet in front of me, boiling my skin. I looked down at my body and noticed cuts and slashes all over it. They must have dragged me through the brush, cutting my skin to shreds. I screamed out to them, "What do you want? Let me go." That was the only thing running through my head. I kept screaming it over and over. When I would try to stand or back away from the fire, the two men would pull the poles tighter, forcing me back to the ground. My eyes melting out of my head. The heat dried them so much that they felt like they were going to crack and shatter into pieces. This went on for minutes or hours, not sure which, before I heard a voice right behind me. It was foreign, not English. It sounded haunting and chanting. I couldn't understand a single word it said. All that I could tell was that it was a man speaking. I turned my head around to see who was making the sound. What I saw silenced my screams. All I could see of him was a strand of feathers bouncing on his back. It looked like a headdress that Indians used to wear. It went all the way down his back. As I strained to turn to get a better look, the two men beside me turned me around to face the man, and he was wearing a headdress. Then I could see that he was addressing a congregation of people. The man wore an elaborate white robe with beads and feathers all over it. He turned around to face me, and I noticed that his headdress was a part of an armored helmet that was shaped like a lion's head, with the headdress being its mane. He wore an armored chest plate, too. He studied me for a moment, then turned back to the congregation. The congregation all sat on logs, wearing black robes that went over their heads. They looked like sheet ghosts, but each had antlers coming out of their heads. All of them sat in complete silence and stillness as they listened to the chief as he danced and chanted in front of them. Every once in a while, the chief would say something that would make the congregation moan and groan, swaying in their seats. At the peak of his sermon, he turned and faced me. He slowly walked to me. I couldn't tell what he was saying, but I knew he was telling them about me. He pulled out a knife from beneath his robe. It was white and jagged. It looked like it was made from bone. He took a slash at my arm. I screamed out in pain. He put the blade back on the cut and held it there for a moment, collecting my blood. After the blade was completely red, he turned back to his people and held up the blade to show them. They groaned even louder, swaying intensely. That sound came again. The animal I had heard of. It was there, just in front of me in the woods. I strained to see into the darkness. I hadn't noticed it, but in the middle of the congregation, there was an aisle. At the end of the aisle was a large ring of woven branches. It must have been 10 feet wide. The sound came from behind it. So close, the sound chilled my bones. Even with the fire burning my skin, I had never heard this animal before today. But I knew that sound was for a hunt. Everyone became silent. Even the chief stepped back out of the way and kneeled. Everyone bowed their heads. I looked around desperately to find a way out. Even the two holding me down were kneeling with their heads bowed. I tried to take my chance. I thrashed and pulled away, but with no avail. Each time I pulled, the ropes pulled tighter. I kept trying until I heard a pop in my arm. I pulled my arm out of its socket. The pain screamed through me. They continued to pull, paralyzing me in pain. The howl came again. This time, it sounded like it was laughing at me, almost like a hyena taunting me. I looked through the ring into the darkness and saw red glowing eyes looking at me. Its head came into the light. It looked like a mix of a bear, a panther, and a werewolf. Out of its head grew thick horns that curled back to its shoulder blades. It stepped through the ring, revealing its body. The black, shaggy fur bounced with each step. It moved like a lion, with its head low to the ground, keeping its eyes locked on mine. I could see the power and grace of this beast. I was terrified, but I couldn't help but gawk at its dominating presence. As it neared me, all I could think about was how I had treated my girlfriend. All she wanted was to spend time with me. I thought that this was all about me, but it should have been about us. I couldn't even talk to her on the phone. I just texted her what she wanted to hear to get her to shut up so I could get back to myself. I abandoned her to follow the story of a dead man when she was alive and wanted me. Its hot breath was on my face. I looked into its deep red eyes and saw nothing but anger. A powerful swipe of its paw put me face down on the ground. The two guys holding my arms let go of their poles as the creature put its paw on my back, and large blades ripped up my back as it pulled me closer to it. It took every ounce of energy that I had left to scream out in pain worse than I had ever felt. Large teeth sank into my neck as I was dragged back into the woods. As I watched the ground pass underneath, I went deeper into the darkness.